On this channel, we've explored films that held great promise, but due to various circumstances were never fully realized. However, no example is as heartbreaking as The Thief and the Cobbler, an animated film that took its creator over 3 decades of hard work and rejection to complete, only to end up in a disastrous state. To truly understand the intimate story of this epic struggle, we must delve into the mind and soul of its mastermind, Richard Williams. His name might not be immediately familiar, but to give you an idea, he headed the animation team for Who Framed Roger Rabbit and wrote the book that became the Bible for every animation student. A native of Toronto, Williams had a wild imagination. His mother would read him Arabian Nights. Those stories of heroes, villains, and magical lands shaped his life and his art. As a boy, he was also mesmerized by Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. These early experiences sparked his interest in drawing and animation. Having moved to London as a young man, Williams found work animating commercials. He also began creating his own short films. These early works showcased his extreme perfectionism, a trait that would define his career. He was never afraid to spend countless hours experimenting with new techniques or perfecting existing ones. As a result, his commercials were truly exceptional and garnered hundreds of awards. Despite his reputation for delivering projects behind schedule due to his obsessive attention to detail, his work was always flawless. This led to opportunities to animate the opening credits for films like What's New Pussycat and Casino Royale. But Williams had bigger ambitions. He dreamed of creating his own animated feature. In 1964, Williams founded his own animation studio. Through his business manager, Omar Ali Shah, he was introduced to the stories of Nasruddin, a popular figure in Muslim folklore. Nasruddin's tales reminded Williams of the Arabian Knight stories he had loved as a child, and he was instantly captivated. Shah and his brother encouraged Williams to illustrate some Nasruddin books they had written, and even proposed making an animated film. Williams was thrilled with the idea, and it quickly became his passion. Rather than seeking studio backing, Williams decided to produce the film independently, funding it with his earnings from freelance work. This would give him complete creative control. He was determined to create an animated film unlike any other, pushing the boundaries of the medium. He planned to use innovative techniques such as perspective animation and dynamic camera movements. He would also experiment with long, uninterrupted sequences featuring characters in constant motion. Moreover, Williams aimed to enhance the visual quality of animation. While the industry standard at the time was 12 frames per second, Williams intended to use 24 frames, matching the frame rate of live-action films, to achieve a more fluid and realistic look. In order to achieve his ambitious goal, Williams recruited a world-class team. He hired Ken Harris, a seasoned Warner animator famous for his work on Looney Tunes, to lead the animation. He also brought on board designer Roy Naisbitt to create the backgrounds. With a team of 40 animators, Williams was ready to begin production. By this point, they had tentatively titled the film The Amazing Nasruddin. Production began in the late 1960s, but Williams's perfectionism quickly slowed things down. Working independently, he opted not to use a script or outline, preferring to focus on technical innovation. With a strong personality, he encouraged his team to contribute ideas, which they would then shape into characters and storylines. The project was initially titled The Majestic Fool, but by 1970 it was simply called Nasruddin. In late 1972, Williams and his team finished a 3-hour rough cut of the film. The film was a series of visually striking short stories, but it lacked a clear overall narrative and well-developed characters. When he screened it for a small group, the feedback was unanimous. The visuals were beautiful, but the story needed work. Williams agreed and understood that making the necessary changes would require additional time. Despite the slow pace of the project, Williams remained dedicated. In 1971, he completed the short film A Christmas Carol, which won him an Oscar. He hoped this would generate interest in Hollywood, and it did. Paramount Pictures showed interest in Nasruddin. But then, Williams encountered the first of many challenges that would plague the project. As negotiations with Paramount progressed, he discovered financial irregularities within his company. An investigation revealed that his business manager, Omar Ali Shah, the same person who had introduced him to Nasruddin, had embezzled funds. After firing Shah, both he and his brother demanded a 50% share of the profits from Nasruddin. As a result of this ongoing legal battle, Paramount withdrew from the project, forcing Williams to fight to retain the rights to the characters. These legal disputes threatened to sink the project entirely, but Williams persevered. He was able to secure the rights to certain characters, albeit under the condition that he couldn't use the name Nasruddin. In 1973, almost 10 years after the project had started, he announced that it would move forward. After receiving feedback about the film's lack of a script, Williams decided to bring in a professional writer. He hired screenwriter Howard Blake and his own wife, Margaret French, to develop a new script. Using the original cut of Nasruddin as a foundation, they created a more streamlined narrative with refined dialogue, influenced by the work of silent film legends like Charlie Chaplin. The most significant change was replacing the character of Nasruddin with a bumbling cobbler. The new script, titled Tin Tac, was set in an Arabian city ruled by King Nod. The king has a daughter, Princess Yum Yum, and a treacherous vizier named Anwar. As danger approaches, two silent anti-heroes, Tac and the Thief, rise to the challenge. Once the script was finished, Williams brought together a group of experienced animators and started casting voice talent. They were fortunate enough to cast the iconic Vincent Price as the sinister vizier Anwar, a role that perfectly suited his reputation as a horror film legend. Once again, Williams's commitment to perfection slowed down the project. He revisited the script and ordered revisions. He wanted to avoid the typical Disney narrative structure and create a film where the storylines only converged at the end. During this phase, some characters were renamed, like Anwar, who became Zigzag. These changes meant that characters and backgrounds had to be redesigned and reanimated. Ultimately, the film was given the definitive title, The Thief and the Cobbler. With the project over budget and running behind schedule, Williams had no choice but to pause production. He took on side jobs to support himself and keep the film alive. Any free time he had, he spent searching for investors. After a decade of development, Williams turned to some unusual sources for funding in 1978. He was able to secure a meeting with a Saudi Arabian prince who was enthralled by The Thief and the Cobbler and wanted to see the project finished. The prince agreed to invest, but only after seeing a completed sequence. Williams was given a budget of $100,000 to create a 10-minute sequence. This sequence was one of the most visually impressive parts of the film, featuring a war machine and other elements that demonstrated Williams' technical abilities. That sequence could have saved The Thief and the Cobbler, but it wasn't to be. Williams fell behind schedule once again and exceeded the budget by a significant margin, spending a total of $250,000. The prince, viewing this as a breach of trust, withdrew his support. Now, you might be wondering just how meticulous Williams was. To give you an idea, this scene showing the vizier's zigzag shuffling cards, which last less than 20 seconds, took months to complete. Each individual card was animated separately. Even after all that effort, Williams wasn't satisfied with the colors of the cards, so the entire sequence had to be painstakingly redrawn, using the limited technology of the era. The project was once again on the verge of collapse due to lack of funds. Undeterred, Williams continued to take on freelance work to keep it going and pay his team. In the early 1980s, he put together a 20-minute presentation and showed it to a promising new contact, Gary Kurtz, the producer behind the Star Wars franchise. Excited by the project, Kurtz agreed to help Williams secure financing in Hollywood. Williams saw this as his best chance to get the support he needed. The search for funding continued for years, yet again. Williams was determined, but his animation team was growing weary. Many of them left to pursue other projects or because they were simply burned out. After nearly 2 decades of setbacks, Williams finally caught a break in 1986. Test screenings of The Thief and the Cobbler were praised by Steven Spielberg and Robert Zemeckis, who were in the midst of production on the ambitious Disney film Who Framed Roger Rabbit. This unique blend of comedy and film noir, set in an alternate 1947 where humans and cartoons coexisted, was right up Williams' alley. While initially reluctant to get involved, Williams was convinced by a Disney executive who promised it would open doors for his future projects. While Roger Rabbit was a box office hit and a critical darling, the production was anything but smooth. In fact, it was quite chaotic, a topic we may delve into in a future video. To paint a picture, imagine a perfectionist like Williams working within Disney's demanding production schedule. The animation process was significantly behind schedule, and Williams' relationships with both the animation team and Disney deteriorated as a result. Despite the challenges, the results were undeniable. Williams won 2 Oscars, one for visual effects and another for his animation work. With this level of recognition, he was confident that Disney would finally back The Thief and the Cobbler, a project he had been working on for 20 years. But the studio executives were wary of repeating the tumultuous experience they had with Williams on Who Framed Roger Rabbit. Although they offered him a role on Beauty and the Beast, they had no intention of collaborating with him on any future projects. However, there was a brief moment of hope when Warner Brothers expressed interest in the project. They were on the verge of signing a deal until they discovered Williams' reputation for missed deadlines. Concerned about this, they decided to protect their investment by purchasing a completion bond. This meant that Williams was required to finish the film by a certain date, or an insurance company would take over the project. Williams regrouped his team and resumed production. Backed by a powerful studio, he would have the resources to dedicate himself entirely to The Thief and the Cobbler. But the director's perfectionist tendencies began to cause problems once again. His need for every detail to be perfect resulted in constant delays. Once he completed a scene, he would want to experiment with different approaches, which increased both the production time and costs. Warner Brothers proposed using the latest digital technology, which was gaining traction in the animation industry. They believed it would streamline the production process, but the director was adamant about sticking to old-school analog techniques. The situation became even more challenging when Williams and Warner learned that Disney was set to release Aladdin in 1992, a film that similarly drew on Persian folklore. To add insult to injury, some of the animators who had worked on the early stages of The Thief and the Cobbler had moved over to Disney. The director felt the mounting pressure to complete his film before Disney's release. However, Williams was unable to meet the 1991 deadline, insisting he was just 15 minutes away from completion and requesting a 6-month extension. Warner granted his request, but when the new deadline arrived, Williams could only deliver a crude, unfinished version of the film. Fed up, Warner exercised the insurance clause, handing the project over to the completion bond company. Despite Williams' pleas to stay involved, he was terminated without cause in May 1992, after nearly 30 years of dedicated work. He had lost his life's work. Even on his final day, he could be found at his animation desk, working by hand until he was physically removed. After Williams' departure, The Thief and the Cobbler underwent a rushed production. Fred Calvert, a television animator, was brought in to direct and was tasked with completing the film quickly and cheaply. To appeal to mainstream audiences, the film was retooled to resemble Disney's popular animated features. Calvert hired foreign animators, cut much of Williams' work, and added new voice actors and songs. It took 18 months to finish the film. Released in September 1993 by Allied Filmmakers, under the new title The Princess and the Cobbler, the film was a commercial flop. Both critics and audiences accused it of blatantly copying Aladdin, which had been a box office hit. It was a bitter irony. The saga of The Thief and the Cobbler took another turn when Miramax, then a Disney subsidiary, acquired the film in 1994. Harvey Weinstein, the studio's head at the time, oversaw a re-edit that added dialogue to the silent characters and included more songs to emulate Aladdin. Released in August 1995 as Arabian Knight, the film was a commercial disappointment. Despite some positive critical reception, the film failed to find a wide audience. The DVD release was equally unsuccessful, with many copies being given away as promotional items in cereal boxes. Following a grueling 28-year production, The Thief and the Cobbler met a disappointing fate. Williams was deeply disheartened by the film's reception. He retreated from the public eye, declining job offers and instead choosing to mentor young animators. He seldom discussed the project that had consumed him, even avoiding the versions released by Warner and Miramax. Williams passed away in 2019, but his legacy as a talented animator and dedicated artist lives on. The unfinished Thief and the Cobbler has developed a cult following over the years, intriguing those fascinated by films never fully realized. Garrett Gilchrist, a film enthusiast and restorationist, became particularly obsessed. He acquired an early cut sent to Warner by Williams and pieced together the director's original concept. The result was the fan-made The Thief and the Cobbler, the recobbled cut. The film's troubled production also served as the subject of a documentary called Persistence of Vision. Originally conceived as a cinematic event, The Thief and the Cobbler was plagued by delays, challenges, and unfortunate circumstances. None of the released versions fully capture the director's ambitious vision, yet glimpses of a potential animated masterpiece remain.
Alien 3 is one of the most discussed movies of the saga. It is also the one with more problems during production, with creative teams coming and going.